Let's talk about another contradiction in the Bible. Who sold Joseph into Egypt? Was it Ishmaelites or was it Midianites? Or are Ishmaelites and Midianites just the same group of people? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and Genesis 37 verses 18 through 36 are where we lay our scene. Here are those passages from the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version. And when you read through this narrative, there are some confusing repetitions. For instance, we have two different verses that explain Joseph's brothers conspired to kill him. And then we have two different brothers intervening to stop them. First, Reuben says, "What if we didn't kill Joseph? What if we did this other thing?" And the brothers go, "Okay." And then we have Judah saying, "What if we didn't kill Joseph? What if we did this other thing?" And then the brothers say, "Okay." And then we have two different groups of people that acquire Joseph and take him to Egypt. The Ishmaelites do it, but the Midianites also do it. And then we have some other details that seem to be omitted from this story, because the way it stands now, all the brothers are sitting down to eat and then decide that they'll sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites/Midianites. And then out of nowhere, Reuben comes back and discovers that Joseph is not in the pit and runs to tell his brothers. But the brothers aren't like, "Yeah, you moron, we just sold him." They don't know what's going on the way this story is being told. So it's not a very cohesive story. And it includes what are known as doublets. And doublets are where you have different versions of the same narrative detail. And this happens in many different places throughout the Pentateuch or the Torah or the first 5 books of Moses. And this observation is what gave rise to Pentateuchal source criticism and the theoretical models like the documentary hypothesis, the supplementary hypothesis, the fragmentary hypothesis. And doublets can occur in different parts of the story. So for instance, we have the story of a man and his wife arriving in a new city, and the man telling the leader of the city, "This is not my wife, this is my sister," and then the leader of the city finding out and getting angry in 3 different places in the Pentateuch. It happens with Abraham and Sarah in Egypt in Genesis 12. Then it happens again in Genesis 20 with Abraham and Sarah in Gerar, where Abimelech is the king. And then it happens with Isaac and Rebekah in Genesis 26 in Gerar, where Abimelech is the king, but now suddenly he's the king of the Philistines, even though this is happening centuries before the Philistines would even arrive in this part of the world. You can also have doublets that get placed right next to each other, one after the other. So the 2 different creation accounts are an example of this. One creation account runs from Genesis 1:1 to the first half of Genesis 2:4. And then the other creation account runs from the second half of Genesis 2:4 through to the end of Genesis 3. You can also weave together the different stories, and that's likely what we have going on with the different accounts of the flood, and also here in Genesis 37. Because when you look at this narrative, you have 2 beginnings, you have 2 middles, and you have 2 ends. And you can just separate out those different versions of the same elements of the story. And if you do that, these are the verses that you can identify. And when you separate them out, you get 2 separate, perfectly consistent, perfectly cohesive stories. In the longer version of the story, they conspire to kill him, and then they look up and see Ishmaelites are coming from Gilead, and Judah says, "Hey, let's not kill our brother. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, and then we'll fake his death and take his robe to his father after we've put some animal blood on it so that he'll think Joseph is dead," and the brothers go, "Okay," and they do that. In the other version of the story, they conspire to kill him, and then Reuben says, "No, let's not do that. Let's just throw him in this pit and go have lunch." And while they're having lunch, Midianite traders pass by, draw Joseph out of the pit, and take him into Egypt and sell him to Potiphar. And when Reuben comes back, he sees that Joseph is not there, and he runs and tells his brothers, who also don't know what has happened. So these 2 versions of the story were woven together into the one story that we have now in Genesis 37, 18 through 36. And this story is kind of a Rorschach test for your dogmatic approach to the Bible. If you're dogmatically committed to the univocality, to the inerrancy, to the inspiration of the Bible, your intuitive cognition is going to want to protect your commitment to those dogmas and is going to nudge you in the direction of feeling like it's more likely that what's going on here is that the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are just the same group of people. Because we have this secondary passage that was added to Judges 8:24, where the enemy is the people of Midian, and they are taking jewelry and earrings from them, and then you have this parenthetical statement, because they were Ishmaelites. And so that seems to identify the Ishmaelites as the Midianites. And so if you use that interpretive lens on this passage, you can just say, oh, Ishmaelites, Midianites, same group of people, and this resolves the cognitive dissonance. Even though it requires, we imagine the author here is just arbitrarily toggling back and forth between referring to these people as Midianite traders and referring to them as Ishmaelites. In Judges 8:24, the editor figured you needed to know that the Ishmaelites were the Midianites, but here the author seems to think you already know, and for some silly reason is just like, I want to call them different names every time I refer to them. And it doesn't resolve all of the other tensions. But if you have that dogmatic commitment, intuitively, subconsciously, you're going to be pushed into finding that more likely, finding that more convincing, because that protects that dogmatic commitment. Now, if you don't have a dogmatic commitment to the inspiration, to the inerrancy, to the univocality of this story, it's obviously going to seem a lot more likely that this is just two different versions of the story that have been woven together. And this is why biblical scholars, whether they are Christian, whether they are Jewish, whether they are agnostic or atheist, are in widespread agreement that this is the result of the weaving together of two different versions of this story. So your intuitive reaction to the consensus view regarding how this story came together is an indicator of how dogmatically committed you might be to the inspiration, the inerrancy, the univocality of the biblical text. But by far the most likely conclusion is that we have two different versions of this story that have been woven together, probably so that the editor can preserve two different versions that they found in their sources and not have to get rid of one in favor of the other. And this is why, again, we have other places where the same story is told in two different ways back to back, or the same story is told in different ways in different parts of the Pentateuch. And this is what gives rise ultimately to the different theories of Pentateuchal source criticism, such as the documentary hypothesis, the supplementary hypothesis, the fragmentary hypothesis. And here are a variety of different publications you can check out of differing degrees of accessibility if you want to learn more about Pentateuchal source criticism and how the Pentateuch came together. And the fit for this video does not say Romans go home.